Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of The Life of a Rebel. Harley here again. And today I am really grateful and very privileged to have an old friend of mine on the show, Tim Ferriss.
Oh, thanks so much. It's an honor to be here. It's been a thrill and also hilarious and enjoyable to be your friend. And what a ride. So I'm extremely pleased to be here. Thanks for having me on.
So I've listened to a bunch of interviews that you've done because obviously you have this incredible podcast and incredible show, The Tim Ferriss Show, that is, top 3 or top 5 show on the planet. But I wanted to dig into a different angle of Tim Ferriss on this, and one, obviously, a lot of people know you from The Tim Ferriss Show, the podcast. People know you from your books, For Our Workweek, For Our Body, For Our Chef. But people also, when they do research on you, they hear things like, you becoming a world-class tango dancer and you learning how to cook and you learning how to create income-generating side businesses. And learning, of course, is at the core of so much of the Tim Ferriss experience, the Tim Ferriss brand. But I want to go back to the beginning. I'm curious, what was the first moment when you knew you wanted to be an entrepreneur? Did you have a first business when you were growing up, something like that?
I had all sorts of harebrained ideas. It would be nice if I could point to a master plan and all of these sequential, brilliant strategic moves. But the fact is, I made a terrible employee, and I really disliked the first handful of jobs that I had. I started working probably when I was 14. I don't know if it was even legal, but I was cleaning the floors and machines in an ice cream shop and did a lot of work in the service industry, which I think everyone should have at least one summer of. And didn't make a great employee with a few exceptions, and asked a lot of questions, which got me in a lot of trouble because I seemed like I was insubordinate, which I probably was. So I had a lot of those experiences. So I think that part of my becoming an entrepreneur was just being unfit, really, to be much of an employee. And the second part, I think, that fed it, and this is just a bit of backstory, is I had incredible insomnia as a kid. I still do have quite a bit of onset insomnia at times. I would stay up until 3, 4 in the morning. Now, back in the day, right, because I'm 43, if I remember correctly, back in the day, what was on television, probably still is on television at 2 or 3 in the morning, is infomercials. Yeah. And so I became fascinated by infomercials.
I'll put it in my machine and
set it and forget it.
And became somewhat of a student of them, although I didn't think of myself as that, noticing the different offers, the different variations that would show up, because they were doing split testing, just as we understand it today.
Totally.
And my first business attempt was an audio cassette called How I Beat the Ivy League, which is so embarrassing to say. It makes me cringe. But it was an admissions guide for people who wanted to apply to Ivy League schools.
Was entrepreneurship, was it something innate in you? Was it something, did your parents do something for a living that had an impact on you? Did you see someone and say, I'm inspired by that? Or was it something that you sort of discovered having not wanting to, have a typical job?
Well, I think from an early age, I viewed entrepreneurship as freedom in 2 respects. One respect was the ability to chart your own course and march to your own drummer. The other type of respect was financial. That is financial freedom of some type. And I grew up in a middle-class family. Both parents worked. My mom worked as a physical therapist. My dad was a real estate broker, so very much entrepreneurial in that sense. I saw also not just the pros, but the cons of being an entrepreneur. That is that you can have feast or famine cycles and you can have seasonality, et cetera. So it wasn't all rose-colored glasses. But the 2 types of freedom greatly appealed to me. And I would imagine I was probably, if I'm recalling correctly, influenced a bit later in life reading books like Losing My Virginity by Richard Branson and so on, it's hard not to get romanced as a teenage boy by Richard Branson stories. And I thought about it constantly. And I mean, the insomnia ended up being a blessing in a sense that these ideas would kind of churn, and these sometimes good, most of the time bad ideas would percolate. So I did a lot of homework, and I did a lot of studying of entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship.
Was there a time though, before we get into sort of Brainquicken, that you, at some point, you're finishing college at an Ivy League school, the majority of your classmates, I presume, are going to have, big jobs. They're either going to, big consulting firms or big corporations. Yeah. Did you sort of reject that path? Was it something that you thought, okay, I understand that I'm supposed to go this way, but I just don't want to? Because you did take a corporate job eventually.
I wanted to work in a company where I could learn more about building companies and entrepreneurship in an area that was growing. So the two I looked at as most closely and wanted to join were Trilogy Software, based in Austin, Texas. That's how I first fell in love with Austin, was I made it to like the final round. They flew me out, saw all the fun. This place is amazing. And then I didn't get the job. And believe it or not, Capital One, because at the time they were one of the most sophisticated direct mail marketers. They did all sorts of, we were talking about split testing, but they did all sorts of really sophisticated, at the time, given the tools, marketing in the way that they approached credit and credit cards and so on. Didn't get that job either. And then ended up deciding that I wanted to choose location. And I got advice from Professor Ed Shao at Princeton in electrical engineering, who said, in effect, the industry doesn't really matter that much as long as it's growing. Get into something that is growing quickly. So I joined a data storage startup, a storage area networking startup with, I want to say, 15 people at the time. Ended up growing to between 100 and 200 before it imploded like everything else.
And so you decided while working at this company to start this side hustle, Brainquicken. And I'm curious, you're working there, you're out of school, you have a bit of swagger coming out of, Princeton and things, you probably you're making some real money. You're living in a great new city, great new place. What inspired you to sort of branch off and say, I want to start something? A side hustle at that point was not unique. In fact, I would suggest that around that time, starting a side business, because the term side hustle didn't really exist in 99 or 2000. But starting something on the side was almost viewed as like a distraction, not something that people were proud of.
Yeah. The side hustle came about for a few reasons. Number one, I ended up becoming kind of disaffected. And I remember the day it happened, we started getting more and more middle management, which is very important. But the mentorship, in a sense, that I had been receiving, the lessons I was learning, the skills I was developing, really took a backseat once we had a few layers in the organization. And that's not true everywhere, but it was true in this company. And I had a very particular approach to closing sales. I was good. I was very good. And that had been maybe honed over years of, who knows, absorbing movies like Glengarry Glen Ross and infomercials. I don't know.
A, B, C. A, always B, B, C, closing. Always be closing. Always be closing.
I was really good at it, and this new manager came in, and he dropped a huge stack of papers, like several inches thick, on my desk, and he said, "Start with A and start dialing."
Are these the Glengarry Glen Ross leads? I mean, is that sort of how it felt?
I wished it had felt that way, because that would have meant these were coveted, well-vetted leads, and they were not. It was just like a phone book, and I was like, okay, this job is about to get really monotonous and really unprofitable from a learning perspective.
And is that what you were optimizing for at that point? I mean, you selected a particular geography to get access to, the people that were in that geography. You selected a company, even if it wasn't the right space, because it was growing. Were you also, was the compensation in your mind at that point coming out of school partially financial and partially how fast can I grow?
It was almost entirely how quickly can I develop skill sets, and with that, confidence, and also see how companies are built.
So they drop the stack. You are
stack
passionate about this.
Yeah, I'm like, all right, this is going to be a problem. And that management style was symptomatic of other issues I saw within the company. And I won't give you the laundry list, but suffice it to say, I thought to myself, the writing's on the wall. This, and there's a good chance we're about to hit the wall. Like we're about to hit a brick wall at 1,000 miles an hour, and this is going to be very ugly. So at that point, I started thinking of contingency plans. So it didn't start off intended to be a side hustle. It started off as an attempt to start something while I still had security, which does sound like a side hustle, but it was also intended to be a safety net in case the current income went away, which I thought was pretty likely. And that ended up being accurate. Everybody got fired. So I started this, and I took my lunch hours to make phone calls out of the conference rooms to different people and companies I thought might be willing to have a conversation with someone about this new industry I was exploring. Not new to me personally as a consumer, but certainly as a possible business owner. I did a lot of due diligence before even starting. And that ended up being the sports nutrition world. So Brainquicken, for those who don't know, was this product initially intended to help people become smarter. I should have learned my lesson from How to Beat the Ivy League.
Yeah, the cassette tape. Yeah.
Yeah. It turns out in the US that most people do not want to be smarter, or they say they do, but they're not willing to pay for it or to have any cognitive enhancement, And this was disappointing, but ended up pivoting into the world of athletics and doing very well.
So the job went away before you had decided to pursue the side hustle full time.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
it's a great safety net, as you said, because you now have optionality, but it also gave you this thing that can generate income. And this is before nootropics. This is before sort of there was this direct to consumer craze. What was the business model of the company, the distribution of Brainquicken?
It was very simple. Now it was in concept, very simple. The tools and infrastructure available at the time left a lot to be desired, as you know. The model was really simple. It was take a product that I had effectively used myself. I had sort of cobbled together in a very interesting way this cocktail of different smart drugs for my own use when I was an undergrad. And had experimented with all sorts of things that didn't make it into the product. But I had what I felt was a pretty decent fluency with the safe and readily available ingredients that could at least temporarily improve cognition. And it was a world I knew really well. I knew certainly which magazines the market read because I read those magazines. I knew which websites they went to because I went to those websites. And given my price insensitivity, I thought there was an opportunity possibly to create a high quality and high margin product. Yeah. And in retrospect, the playbook that I ended up using, which I didn't have a model for, really, although the only model I had was infomercials, yet again, because a lot of infomercials would use infomercials effectively as break-even advertising to drive direct-to-consumer awareness to such a point that they could then distribute through Rite Aid, Walmart, etc. And that is where they made the money, was at retail. So I, in a way, copy and pasted that on a very small scale to create enough buzz that people would then be asking for the product at places like GNC or bodybuilding.com. And
it's amazing because, one of our mutual friends, Damon John, always talks about if one of the questions he gets often because of Shark Tank is, what's the best pitch? How does someone create the best pitch? And he always says, watch infomercials. And the reason he suggests that is because the science behind infomercials, it's expensive. They only have, 20 minutes. It gets repeated over and over again, but they have tested everything from the color of the shirt that the spokesperson is wearing to when the toll-free number gets displayed to the demo. And so in many ways, infomercials may sound like a joke, but actually it's incredibly sophisticated.
Yep. And let me piggyback on that. I had a number of habits that really helped me through all of this. One was I had a 3-ring binder that I called my swipe file. And a swipe file, that's a term borrowed from copywriting. So a lot of the best ad copywriters would keep swipe files. And that meant when you came across really compelling copy, text for an advertisement, if you bought anything that was informed by advertising, you would take it and you would save it and you would study the elements that made it persuasive to you. And I did that. And I was able to model a lot of it. I was able to imitate my way into making a lot more money by saving these things.
Amazing.
And secondly is I would buy products to study their flow and their rules. So I wanted to study the scripts that their operators used. I wanted to look at what cross-sells and upsells they used. This is a hell of a lot easier now with the web.
Sure.
I would study that. I would buy products and then I would return them. And I would see what the return process looked like. Was it easy? Was it hard? Did it really piss me off? In which case I didn't want to have that experience or impose that on other people. And so on and so forth. So you really, by doing some very basic things like that consistently, can get the education, the practical education, especially for direct-to-consumer products, of an MBA in a matter of months. I mean, it's,
and much more practical because, a lot of the stuff in any business school, certainly for me, it was very pedagogical, but, in a very, Timbo way, you really took a very scientific approach to something that most people are not always scientific about. I mean, part of, one of the worst pieces of advice I think that entrepreneurs get is to just throw some shit at the wall and see what sticks. And I don't think trial and error is a bad thing per se, but if you actually don't know why something failed, there's no way, if you agree that failure is discovery of something that didn't work, you actually have to know what didn't work as opposed to just keep repeating the same mistakes. And what's fascinating to me is you did this, you built this company, you made money with it, you used a very scientific approach to it, which, you decided to kind of document this is my for work. I actually reread the book last week in preparation for our chat. I've read it now 3 times, once when we first met, and once around the IPO 2016 actually, and then more recently, and now I have all my notes in it. But this idea of you putting together a guidebook, like a couple, a way for people to follow along and actually pattern match their own product into some of the things that worked for you. That's a pretty big leap from entrepreneurship. I mean, going from, I had this great company to, wait a second, I learned a lot on this journey. Maybe I'm going to share this with other people. How'd you make the leap to this?
Yeah, it was accidental. I had committed to myself after college that I would, because my senior thesis literally almost killed me. I mean, that's a whole separate story. I had committed after the thesis that I would not write anything longer than an email ever again in my life. Now, clearly, for those who have seen any of my books, which tend to look like phone books, the 4-Hour Workweek is 400 something pages. It's the shortest one, I believe.
Yeah, I think the 4-Hour Body is the chef actually is like this thick.
They're all 600, 700 pages.
Okay,
And when I saw your prep notes for this conversation, the recommendations to elevate the laptop to get a better angle, and it recommended books, and there are thousands of photographs of people using my books to elevate their laptop to make these ad hoc standing desks. But
although I think that assumes that they bought it, digested it, enjoyed it, and now they're using it as a prop.
It's multi-purpose. If you need it for self-defense or to elevate your laptop, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, it's like Kramer's coffee table book that also turns into a coffee table.
See, the beauty of my book is if you don't have a coffee table, it turns into a coffee table.
God, there's a blast from the past. So I did not want to write books. I explicitly did not want to write anything longer than an email. And what changed that is starting around 2003, that same Professor Show I mentioned earlier, who had greatly influenced me in a class called High-Tech Entrepreneurship, at the time, Electrical Engineering 491, although it didn't involve a lot of engineering at all. He invited me to come back and lecture to the class. And that started an annual trip, a biannual trip, twice a year to speak to students and talk about bootstrapping this startup, Brainquicken. And over time, because I got bored of giving the same presentation, I would give different presentations. And what I'd realized by 2004, 2005 is that money is just a currency that you trade for experiences. And if you are lacking in other currencies, things I would consider currencies, or at least highly important variables like time, mobility, that the practical value of those dollars can go down to close to zero. And I want to say this is, well, I came back and probably had this conversation in 2005 at some point, where the insomnia that I mentioned again, right? Sometimes these curses turn out to be blessings at times. Led me to come up with all these book ideas. Now, why did I have book ideas? Because a snarky Princeton student had put in feedback to the class, why don't you just write a book and be done with it? I don't understand why you're teaching a class to a bunch of undergrads. Yeah, I don't understand why you're teaching a class to a bunch of undergrads. You just write a book and be done with it. And I think it was actually intended to be really like insulting, given the other context in this guy's feedback. But it planted a seed that kept me up late at night, where I would have these ideas for headlines, these ideas, because I'd done all this copywriting, right? So I think about these things, all these ideas for chapters and so on, almost all of which was based on previous lectures. So here's the other key part here, is that I had workshopped this stuff. This was like a comedian who's worked on their material. I knew
this comedian didn't know they were doing stand-up, but they were.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I knew this material had an impact on students. I knew it worked for certain demographics. And I wrote to Jack Canfield, who I had gotten to know by volunteering at events in Silicon Valley to try to meet people way above my pay grade. So he was co-creator of Chicken Soup for the Soul, 500 million plus copies sold. I mean, wrap your head around that. And I sent him a couple of ideas from this possible book, hoping he would shoot it down. I was like, hey, Jack, do you think there's anything here? People are telling me I should write a book. I don't really think I should. What do you think? And he was like, you should definitely do it. And furthermore, I'm going to introduce you to these agents and these other people and these other people. And I was like, oh my God, I wasn't able to pump the brakes quickly enough. Ended up having these conversations, got turned down by every agent except for one. And that is how the 4-Hour Workweek came to be. It wasn't initially called 4-Hour Workweek. We had dozens of terrible titles. We tested them on Google AdWords. That's how we ended up on 4-Hour Workweek, by the way. Yep. And cost $200. Why not? And the book was turned down by, I always lose track, but it was like 26, 27, 29 publishers said no, and sold it for very little money, paid out in many installments, and here we are.
It's funny. So I asked a few friends that I know have also read the book. Some of them you know as well. What drew them to 4-Hour Workweek, and a lot of them pointed to a similar kind of quote, although they misquoted it, but actually it found the quote. It goes like this: "People don't want to be millionaires. They want to experience what they believe only millions can buy. Whether it's ski chalets, butlers, or exotic travel, often enter the picture. Perhaps rubbing cocoa butter on your belly in a hammock while you listen to waves rhythmically lapping against the deck of your thatch roof bungalow sounds nice. $1 million in the bank isn't the fantasy. The fantasy is lifestyle of complete freedom it supposedly allows. The question is then, how can one achieve the millionaire lifestyle of complete freedom without first having $1 million?" And that, I think, is one of the most interesting, and this is on page 8 out of a 400-page book. I think what the book did was, one, it first began, and this is just my opinion, it first invited people in to say, this is not a book about entrepreneurship or business. This is a book about you. And if this idea of having flexibility and freedom is interesting, please continue. And then, of course, it goes through very tangible, very valuable tactics in order to kind of build that lifestyle. But where I want to go now is the book to your point and to the paragraph I just read, it masquerades itself a little bit as like it's a bit of a Trojan horse. Yes, it's about lifestyle, but it also, for me and for a lot of people, it's very much the entrepreneur's handbook. And I'm curious if that was ever the intention, or if that sort of is what some people pull from it and other people pull something different.
I wrote the book I wished I had had when I was first considering starting a company, because I was asking some good questions, but I was missing a lot of extremely important questions. I made a lot of expensive mistakes. I burned out. I was lucky that it happened early, honestly. Sometimes it's a slow burn. Mine was a fast burn.
And you didn't have responsibilities. You didn't have, family to take care of or anything like that.
That's right. That's
valuable.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. I mean, if I had been married, it probably would have caused a divorce.
Yeah.
And I was just lucky that I got through it early and kind of ran through fire when I was single. So I wrote the book that I wished I had had, and I addressed it to two friends. And that was as far as I thought through intention, honestly.
The 4-hour work week, besides just being a blueprint for lifestyle, it's also a bit of a blueprint or a guide for finding your life's work, for redefining how you spend your time. I think we're about 14 years after the first edition. Is that right?
Yes, it's crazy to think about.
Totally. Yeah, it's the book's. It's past the book's bar mitzvah at this point. But fast forward 14 years, the book has become a man. It's no longer a boy. It feels like things like life hacking and entrepreneurship and taking control of your time is now a much larger part of the conversation many people feel. But when you think about what is happening today, and there's obviously a lot of talk about, hustle culture, and certainly you with you described your earlier burnout earlier in our chat, this hustle culture that is so often promoted can also be quite detrimental. And in many ways, it feels like the 4-hour work week was almost the antithesis. It was almost the original anti-hustle, meaning it was less about working hard. It was more about working smart. What do you think about that?
I get extremely frustrated by many elements of what we might call hustle culture. Mm-hmm. And to be really clear, I have no problem with hard work as long as it's applied to the right things. First and foremost, the 4-hour work week, in part, is a book about maximizing per hour output. It's very seductive to believe that if you just hustle, if you just work harder, you will get better results. And that just is patently not true. We all know lots of people who work very hard and seem not to be able to translate those hours into the results that they want. It's extremely common. I've had that experience for periods of my life also. In the beginning of many different endeavors, I've had lots of what we might consider failures, although I view my life as a sequence of experiments, so I'm able to remove the emotional charge of things that don't work. For instance, I never would have started my podcast had the 4-hour chef not been, for me, a huge commercial disappointment. Even though I'm very proud of the book, but there were many reasons that book did not sort of find the groove I was hoping that it would find. In any case, hustle. It's a dangerous drug, I would say. And if I had to choose between two drugs, one called hustle and one called relentless focus, I would choose relentless focus.
I think this idea that, focus, like you can work hard, but if you're not actually if you have 10 hours, 10 hours in the day where you're at your desk and you probably have 4 really productive hours, you begin to sort of think that, okay, like what are the 3 things that I can do? What is important and what is urgent? And then by having that, and a lot of the stuff, Frank, I learned from you in terms of how I don't always have to be productive, but when I am productive, there is a way to maximize. You call it the force multiplier, and I think that's super important. I want to end with this sort of thing because I don't. Maybe you do appreciate it, but I don't think you do. What the 4-hour work week done, and frankly, what you have done with your podcast and the content you put out, and 5 Bullet Fridays, and the stuff that those of us that really enjoy what you're putting out there, what you have done is you've taken something that always felt out of reach, which is, entrepreneurial pursuits, which is lifestyle hacking, which is things that you just are not accessible to most people, and you have made those accessible. I'm curious to hear, as sort of a final question, what is not in the book that would be in the book if you were going to write it today?
Well, I would take Kevin Kelly's article, 1,000 True Fans, and I would put it into the book as an addendum. That was one thing that I would absolutely do, to really underscore the fact that for the vast majority of people, your objective should not be to build a huge company. And in fact, if you look at many of the most successful, fastest growing companies, certainly that I've ever been involved with, they didn't start off trying to build a huge company.
I mean, Shopify is, I mean, you remember us, but we were a bunch of kids running around.
Yeah. So I think like really searching for not your largest addressable market, but your smallest addressable market first can be very interesting and ultimately highly leveraged.
I love that, because it also speaks to the fact that there is no way to do this quickly necessarily. There's a way to do it effectively. There's a way to expedite certain tools and certain practices. But ultimately, whether it's a podcast or it's a book or it's a piece of software, the reason that people will continue to come back and visit and use that software and read that book and listen to the podcast is because of quality. And I think you have done such a great job of not only inspiring, frankly, I'm going to make you blush a little bit here, but you've inspired an entire vintage of people to try their hand at something that seemed out of reach, seemed difficult. You've boiled it down to easy to understand, almost bite-sized chunks and principles to apply. And you do it with, if I may say so, you do it with swagger. You seem like you're really enjoying what you're doing. And I think, and I, you already like me, so I don't have to flatter you, but that's the truth. You do it with a certain sense of humility, but also with humor that you don't take it that seriously. And I think the best part of what I get, when I listen to your podcast episodes is I get the authentic Tim, and I know authentic Tim, and what you put out there is exactly what you feel personally. And so I want to thank you from all the entrepreneurs for playing that role for all of us. Entrepreneurship is very lonely, and especially lonely in the middle of a pandemic. And so being able to access incredible people and listen to how you dive deep into what they do and how they do it has been a really wonderful thing, particularly in the last couple of years. And from a Shopify perspective, I'm incredibly grateful. I don't think people fully appreciate what a big role you've played in the Shopify story in helping us understand who our true fans are and what we're actually building. And so I feel grateful to have you in my life, and very grateful that you spent this time chatting with me today.
Oh, thanks so much, Harley.